Everybody joining me right now is Harry Braun. He's been active in politics for the last 34 years, and he's running for president in 2020. And I'd like for Harry, for you to introduce yourself, because there's so much about you that I've read. Instead of me introducing you based on what I've read, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about who you are and your background and running for president. So everybody, it's Harry Braun. Harry, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Don, and I appreciate the chance to visit with you today. I am indeed registered as an FEC candidate for 2020. I am a senior scientist who's been working in the area. I'm an interdisciplinary scientist. I actually work both with energy engineers. I worked with them for more than a decade at McDonnell Douglas, where we were working on some of the most advanced solar energy conversion technologies that have ever been developed. They were called dish Stirling concentrator systems, like a satellite dish. In this case, we had a small Stirling engine cantilevered at the focal point in it to produce electricity. And ultimately, hydrogen is our objective, meaning the engineering society that have been an advisory board member of since 1981, that's about 36 years, is the International Association for Hydrogen Energy. It's an organization with thousands of PhD level chemists and engineers and even some medical doctors worldwide. And this organization is amazing because it's never been on the news. They hold major world hydrogen conferences every year, and yet they're never covered. And my belief is that the oil industrial complex is really the deep state in this country that runs our government, both political parties included. And I say that because the Clintons were just as indebted to the oil people and oil wars as are the Republicans. It doesn't matter when it comes to lobbyists, which run our government. The oil industrial complex is really an amazing entity because it's not just oil corporations. The oil corporations in the 1930s set up the pharmaceutical drug industry with things like this, what they call modern medicine. Well, what's that mean? It means the pills they were making weren't from the natural plants. Like aspirin, for example, is a natural substance, acylic acid, and it's in fruit, like blueberries, apples, all sorts of vegetables. And they said, oh, you don't want that. You want aspirin made from oil. Benzene is what's on this modern version of what they call aspirin. And the trouble is it's highly toxic and not only can kill you, it kills thousands of people every year. But the oil industrial complex made more than 1,000% more profit from a barrel of oil when they were making what they called aspirin than when they were making gasoline.
But what makes you not just a smart guy, what makes you someone who could be in the position of power as the president of the United States? I mean, there's a lot of really smart guys who've been talking the way you've been talking for a long time. What sets you apart and makes you believe you could be president?
Well, because the obstacles from our society, our country, and our planet, from which all of the scientists, in fact, there are thousands of, many of them Nobel laureates, who published a number of warnings that the Earth itself is dying. We're in the final exponential stages of making this planet we live on uninhabitable. And it's already mostly over. And their hair's on fire, of course. They're alarmed. And yet these people have been ignored by the oil-owned national news corporations. Because when you're as rich as oil companies, it's easy to set up shell corporations, buy up news networks, and make sure the hydrogen economy or the cannabis economy is never mentioned. And so people have no idea of what it even means, even though Henry Ford was running all of his cars on ethanol and hydrogen fuels made from cannabis, because it was the cheapest way to make it and the quickest way to make it. And that's why the oil industrial complex, led by Andrew Mellon, who was the head of Gulf Oil and also Treasury Secretary, no coincidence there, that's why they made it illegal and had to get it off the market, because Henry Ford was going to put the oil companies out of business, with small farmers growing mostly cannabis as well as other crops that would replace all of the oil, coal, and even the nuclear power plants. Could replace all of them quickly forever with cannabis, and yet they changed the name to an unknown Mexican slang term, marijuana so they could get it removed from the market without any vote in either the House or the Senate, and over the objections of the American Medical Association.
When I look at the list of beliefs and positions that you have at your website, and I look at what I want to do now, and normally when I do an interview like this, I edit out a lot of my sort of, chit chat, but I want to go long here for a moment. I want to talk about some of your key policy objectives, and I'm going to leave one of them out because I want to make a point. On your website, which is braunforpresident.us, the first thing you say is that you want to ratify the democracy amendment so U.S. citizens can take charge of the U.S. Congress. Second thing is you say you want to replace all oil and highly toxic fossil fuels and nuclear fuels with solar-sourced hydrogen. You want to modify every existing home vehicle, aircraft, and power plant to use solar or cannabis-sourced hydrogen. You want to replace the suicidal Ponzi scheme policy of economic growth with a stable state economic policy based on sustainability. You want to provide nonprofit universal health care. You'd like to provide a world-class education online at no cost to all U.S. citizens. End oil wars in the Middle East. You'd like to end the policy of shoot and kill by police. You want to stop producing junk foods and other toxic products. You want to implement a solar, hydrogen, and cannabis economy. You want to end the sick building epidemic. For people who don't know, that if you're in buildings all day long with fluorescent lights, you end up getting sick. All of this, Harry, reminds me, I'm 50, it reminds me a lot of what the 1975 to 85 Democrats would have believed. These are things which I've heard my whole life. In fact, I have a Disney encyclopedia set from somewhere in the late 60s that sort of talked about a lot of these wonderful scientific things to come and sort of a utopian idea of society. That's not new. Here's what I think is new. You also believe that you want to provide that universal health care, et cetera, to American citizens. But you say due to U.S. debt and overpopulation problems, all citizenship, financial and health care benefits, and employment for illegal immigrants must be ended. Now listen, this is why I want to ask you this. 1975 to 85 sort of left-leaning politics, your policies here are generally in line with a lot of that. But your policy on immigration sets you at odds now with the Democrat Party.
Yes, it does.
That's right. 2018 Democrats can't include anything that is what you believe on immigration. So that was a long-form way of me of asking the following question. How in the world are you going to get votes on the left when you have that as your belief system on immigration? But how are you going to get votes on the right with your policies that are more left-leaning? So you are an enigma, and so thank you for allowing me to go long form on that. Go for it. How will you get votes from either side of the aisle?
My policy on immigration is based on science, hard science, and my high priest is a professor of physics at the University of Colorado. His name is Albert Bartlett, and he has a number of YouTube videos that have been recorded of his lectures on exponential growth, which he documents is the principal reason behind the making our planet uninhabitable. Human beings are killing this planet just like cancer cells kill the body. And incidentally, when I make that point about cancer cells, I have a background in molecular biology that I've been working in since my undergraduate work at Arizona State University. About 80% of the cancer cells in our body are not malignant, meaning they don't grow out of control, and they are not lethal. They don't kill us. We don't die from these cancer cells. We die with them. But it's the cancer cells that grow out of control that kill the body, and by inference, it kills those cancer cells too, and that is exactly what the human population is doing. That is what's the principle, and here's where it gets a lot worse. When you force that human population because of ignorance or wealth or greed to only use highly toxic oil that has now been mass produced since they made cannabis illegal, we were making everything from cannabis up to that point. Food, medicines. Cannabis is what civilization in every society was based on. Because you couldn't get for example, ships at sea couldn't get at sea without the super strong cannabis fibers to make the cannabis canvas sails and the ropes and rigging and all of that. that no one could have been a major civilization without mastering the cannabis technologies. And all of our founding fathers were growing it. They considered it a strategically important crop. And in World War II, our government, even though they had made it illegal by the oil industrial complex, they needed the cannabis to win World War II. And Don, do you know why they needed cannabis in World War II for modern battleships?
So that the sailors on the battleships would be calm, cool, and collected as they were getting high all the way to the battlefield.
Okay, that's a good make it up though. Let me tell you why. Because that cannabis was set up and grown all up and down the railroad lines because it grows everywhere quickly. And then they would put it on the railroad cars and ship it back to a corporation called DuPont.
I want to make sure that we're addressing something here, that your position on immigration, you did, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, you did equate immigrants with cancer cells, I think. Am I missing something here?
Oh, I immigrate human overpopulation with cancer cells, yes.
Okay, gotcha. So they
don't have to be immigrants. You can do it perfectly with people who are not immigrants. But the problem is, there's a couple of issues here. We have over 50 million despicably poor people in our country. We have according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we have roughly 100 million people living in an underground economy that pay no taxes because they don't really have real jobs. This is in our country right now, and yet we are encouraging millions of other people who are also very poor to come into our borders, and then we're supposed to take jurisdiction over them, which means we have now financial responsible to provide them with health care, food, nutrition, all the things that these kids in our own country don't have.
It seems to me here that you would think, like Thomas Malthus did, that as a population multiplies geometrically and food arithmetically, the food supply would increase, population rapidly grows, though that eliminates all of the abundance. Are you saying that we're living now in that time when Malthus is going to be proven correct?
Well, we're already virtually there. We have this chemical contamination problem, Don, is so profoundly serious. Professor Sanjay Gupta on CNN, I think you may know him. He is a medical professor at Emory University, and he did a 2-hour documentary called Toxic America, where he pointed out that every man, woman, and child, all of us, are heavily contaminated with these oil-based poisons. And now it's in all of our blood, it's in our genes, and we have epidemics of genetically damaged children. We call it autism, you can call it Alzheimer's, but from a biochemical standpoint, all of these diseases are called from what are called amyloid plaques. And what an amyloid plaque is, it's a protein inside your body that got hit with one of those benzene molecules or other hydrocarbon molecules, and it dissolved it just like gasoline dissolves grease off of an automotive part in a matter of seconds. It's the same chemistry. But when you inhale those fumes into your lungs and get them into your blood, those molecules attack your proteins and melt them into super sticky amyloid plaques that then proceed to destroy your memories and eventually you. And even the water, even if you have perfectly purified water that you've done through a reverse osmosis system, if you put it into a plastic bottle made from oil, you'll have over 24,000 endocrine disrupting toxic chemicals inside that water within a few minutes.
Okay, so I want to get back to your presidential run here. I mean, again, smartest guy in the room, and the facts are all on your side. But when your policies are so, it's like you're standing in two different camps, because on one camp on immigration, you're certainly appealing to, we're going to say, Donald Trump's base. But then on your other policies, you're going to put your foot in the camp of Jerry Braun.
Jerry Braun, I don't like Jerry Braun. I think he's a complete sellout. So please don't put me in the category. Jerry Brown's a big talker, but he is a sellout to the oil industrial complex and fracking and the whole industry. The first thing I'm going to do, Don, if I'm successful, is to get this. In fact, my presidential campaign is organized to organize constitutional conventions in each state to ratify that democracy amendment. And when we get a majority of voters to download the ballots from our website and fill it, now we'll have a paper ballot, which is People say Donald Trump won the election, but nobody can prove it because we didn't use paper ballots. We used a private corporation that nobody knows about, never heard of, and they count on their website. The name of this company is ES&S, and they're owned by they started out by a couple of brothers, the Yusevich brothers, and they were a bunch of very right-wing nutcases who wanted to get in the voter fraud business. In fact, they were involved in that. But anyway, they now count the majority of votes in 42 states in secret, and nobody monitors them. No federal agency, not the FBI, not anybody, even knows what votes they're flipping, and not one national news network even mentioned them in the 2016 campaign. Well, so we've got a completely fraudulent president right now. He didn't win anything. It was all a fraud. If you use paper ballots, and then those paper ballots are mailed by the voter to the Secretary of State's office in their state, then there is no computer hacking involved. It's a straight up, we know who voted. The Secretary of State's office can validate that ballot when it comes in. They can then scan it to a computer database so that the voters can, on their own, validate that their vote was counted properly. And that's super cheap, super quick, and we can do it overnight. And when a majority of voters in 38 states mail those ballots to their Secretary of State's office, the majority of voters are then going to be in charge of anything the federal government does.
If people just sat in and all they heard was what you just now talked about, they would say, hey, that sounds like I just got through listening to Alex Jones. It's certainly not a mainstream Democrat candidate and certainly not a mainstream Republican candidate. Where do you fit in the spectrum? How do your ideas fit, and how will you coalesce people behind you when what you just said to a lot of people means you just put on a tinfoil hat? There's a lot of people listening. I'm not saying it's true. A lot of people heard you and said that sounds crazy. How would you address that argument?
Well, I want to make sure what sounds crazy. I mean, putting the majority of people in charge, that's called democracy. Let me be real clear about this. You only need a dictionary to follow this. You don't need any law degrees to know that the United States has never, ever been a democracy. Not from day one. Our Constitution is crystal clear. The United States was organized as an oligarchic republic where elected officials conduct business in secret and are bribed by the wealthy.
When I said they would say it sounds crazy, I mean the idea that there's a corporation who's controlling the ballots, that they're doing things in secret. That language...
It's in the New York Times. I don't make anything up. I'm a hard science guy. I can prove everything I talk about.
Hey, and listen, I love it. Listen.
All you have to do is Google ES&S.
Yeah, but please understand.
Don't take my word for it.
I'm not being argumentative with you.
No, I want you to be argumentative, Don. I want people to ask hard questions.
Well, good, because
I'm not Donald Trump. I don't deal in just make it up as I go along.
Okay.
I'm a hard science person. My papers are published in engineering journals. I don't make things up.
But here's the thing, Harry, and this is what I'm trying to figure out, which is you've got New York Times articles backing up your beliefs. I totally understand that. I'm saying that to the average Joe six-pack out there who is sitting on his ass on a couch somewhere with a remote control and a bottle of beer, that guy or that gal is going to hear what you said, and I wonder, how do you connect with them when they've been told by the mainstream that you're a crackpot? That's what the mainstream says about the ideas that you're espousing. How do you bridge that gap? I'm not asking whether it's true or not. I'm asking, how do you get to Joe Sixpack who's got to cast a vote?
I'm working as hard as I can to inform the voters, A, that we're not a democracy and never have been. And yet everybody says we are every day. It's a big Orwell. You want to talk about who's lying? Well, all you have to do, you can go to any dictionary and figure out that the United States is not a democracy and never has been.
Now, do you want
my amendment, my 28-word amendment, will make the United States a democracy because it will basically empower the majority of voters to approve all laws, all executive orders, and all Supreme Court recommendations.
Would you mind taking a moment now, Harry, and talking about those 28 words? That's really important, and I've actually seen a video on this online, but I want people to hear from your words, your mouth. What is your democracy amendment, and why is it so important?
Because it eliminates the power of the two political parties and all the lobbyists, sweeps it all away and puts the real power of governing in the hands of a universal mind of over 60 million voters. Those people would then be in charge of approving any wars, any tax increases for the rich like Trump just did. And those 60 million people could get rid of Donald Trump overnight because he's a pathological liar.
So what is the Democracy Amendment? If you could just spell it out for us word for word, what is the Democracy Amendment?
We the people shall empower the majority of voters to approve all laws, legislation, presidential executive orders, and judicial decisions that impact the majority.
Does it concern you that the average IQ has been dropping every year for the last couple generations and the average waistline continues to expand in this country, that you would want to empower, I'm asking now, that group of people to start casting votes on things or to be having a more intimate experience with those decisions?
The answer is we do have an alarming number of terribly uneducated people, brainwashed people. The people that support Donald Trump, for example. There's probably at least a third of the country that apparently supports this man in spite of his pathological lies, and they don't know anything about when he says he's getting rid of regulations. What nobody in the news networks bother to say is what he is doing are Nuremberg class crimes, because he's getting rid of the regulations against the oil and fracking industry, which comes in. Those are the people that are poisoning you and your children forever.
But Harry, I know you're going to argue the same thing about Hillary Clinton. You don't believe she would have been any better, right?
You're right. She was also working for the oil industrial complex, and so was her husband, Bill. And they worked for the nuclear industrial complex. That's how the Russians ended up with 20% of the United States uranium. But Don, mining oil and uranium should be illegal. It's what's making our planet uninhabitable. And if our planet, I don't know what part of uninhabitable people don't understand. If we didn't have the oil corporations owning the so-called news networks, I'm as critical of the news corporations as anyone, because they're owned by the oil companies who censor the public, who keep them stupid. Why, the programming on television is disgusting. It's riddled with violence and getting worse every day. And who allows this? The public doesn't have any control over those news corporations. The public are just a bunch of hapless observers who get this stuff shoved down your throat and you have nothing to say about it. I'm going to put the majority of people in charge of the government and in charge of taking control of these news corporations and making sure they're publicly owned and responsible to the public and not the private wealth.
Harry, do you think that the public actually wants control? Because I talk with people.
I do. Look at the number of people that supported Bernie Sanders, and he wasn't even on the left.
But if you talk again to Joe Sixpack, do you think that do you think the average guy on the street really wants control, or do you believe, because I'm afraid that the average person wants to be told to sit down and shut up?
Then they've been brainwashed, Don, and it's my job and your job to try to communicate and help these people learn how to think critically. When I look at the public opinion polls, Donald Trump's got 30, maybe 35% of the public who thinks he's some sort of acceptable person. And then you've got about 60% of the public right now that would have him thrown out of office tomorrow if they knew about this Democracy Amendment and could do it constitutionally without violence. And then we would arrest the son of a bitch and put him on trial for the Nuremberg class crimes he has committed.
I'm curious how you're not running as a libertarian or some other third party.
I'm the author of the Democracy Amendment. I'm the guy that's going to make our country a real democracy. The fact that the Democratic Party doesn't like the Democracy Amendment speaks volumes about the Democratic Party.
You've really shed the moniker of Democrat, whether in name or not, because you're not espousing mainstream Democrat or Republican views here.
That's because what the Democrats stand for, other than the rights of illegal immigrants and Obamacare, which I think is a disaster. If you're looking left or right, I'm way to the left of anybody you've seen, because I want to put the majority of people in charge. That's about as left as you get. The Russians tried to do that in the Russian Revolution, except the American governments and the British governments, who didn't like the Russian Revolution, have been attacking and trying to undo their revolution ever since, and now Russia has a new czar called Putin. it's not easy making a democracy where the people are actually in charge of the power, not these phony elections that nobody can verify, that we all, and even all of our intelligence agencies and a bipartisan Senate investigation all acknowledge that the Russians hacked that election for Trump and that we have no way to prove that he won anyway, and yet they let him continue to serve and wreck the country day by day.
Yeah, so it's interesting, your take on the hacking of the election goes deeper than the media's story about Russians hacking the election. You're going down to the level that, it almost sounds like the fix was in, regardless of Russian involvement or not.
There's, for our listeners who maybe don't know who Joseph Stalin was, but he was the Russian dictator who has a famous saying about voting. And his saying was, it's not the voters that count, it's who counts the votes. Wow. They determine everything. And that right now in our country happens in secret. And I don't know anybody that I run into that knows the name of that corporation that's counting all these votes. Yeah. Nobody on any news, not even Fox, nobody mentions it. Why is that? Don, they count the votes in 42 states and nobody knows their name and they have a history of voter fraud? My God! And they got billions of dollars from the federal government for the states to buy their rigged machines.
Harry, I gotta ask you.
All we needed are paper ballots you can download in your own house in a very convenient way. You fill out the ballot, send it to your Secretary of State's office, and that's exactly how the citizens, once the citizens are in charge of the government, that's how they're going to rule the government. In terms of, we can't trust the internet system, so we're going to continue to use those paper ballots. The only difference is going to be we're going to make them out of cannabis paper instead of trees.
Out of all the conversations I've ever had, I'll admit to you, I've not had one with anyone who talked about ballots for president on paper made of cannabis.
Do you know how long the paper that's made, the acid paper that's made from trees by these big corporations, do you know how long that paper on average will last? And you can Google this when we're done and verify this. You want to guess how many years that book of paper that you have is going to last before it just disintegrates?
I'm going to guess 1,000 years. How's that?
Try 20.
20,000 years. Okay,
no,
so
20 years.
Oh, 20 years? Oh my goodness. So
check it out. The acid in the paper. The cannabis paper would last 1,000 years.
Well, then
sure.
Well, then you better make sure, Harry, that your democracy amendment is not written on that paper. It needs to be written on cannabis paper. Okay, so
once we get it ratified, you can have this country shifted over to a cannabis economy with breathtaking speed, just like we did in World War II.
Okay, so here's what I want to do. First of all, everybody needs to go check out your website, which is braunforpresident.us. That's the first thing.
And watch the video on the hydrogen economy. They'll love it.
And secondly, I'd like to plan on having you back sometime in the future to go specific issue by issue, because it's one thing to wave arms around and talk generally about philosophy, but I would like to know structurally how a lot of what you believe gets implemented. So would you come back maybe sometime in the future to talk about that?
Absolutely. And by the way, I'm not trying to limit, I'll give you as much time as you need, because I'm a specifics guy. When I talk about the healthcare system, which I call Braun care, which is all based on exactly how the healthcare system operates in the U.S. military, where nobody pays a penny in terms of the customers. When you're sick, you go see the doctor or the dentist. When you're not, you don't. And the doctors and the dentists in the military are not on commission. So they have no financial gain for all the nasty things that they do just to make more money. Yeah, that's a real simple thing to do, and I love to get into the details with you, especially what the costs that are involved and how these trillions of dollars that now go to the oil industrial complex will go to the majority of voters instead.
Harry, let me make a promise to you, my friend. If you give me an interview each week on a specific topic between now and the election, you will make my life much more enjoyable. I would love to have you on talking about specifics. So let's take this up at another interview specifically next time. And until then, everybody, check out Harry's website, braunforpresident.us. Harry, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It's an honor.
Thanks for contacting me, Don.